welcome to episode 12 of On My Studio Table. Behind me I have hanging a special piece of not only wearable art but also an artwork in itself. I originally made it to enter an exhibition in Victoria, which is a state across the Bass Strait from Tasmania in Australia, and one of the requirements was to use a book either for inspiration or actually use the book in the artwork. And what you can't see here, because it's out of the frame, is that I used strips of shredded paper from the book that I used for the inspiration on the lower skirt section. And I will share some photos of that detail plus the entire piece at the end of this video. The jacket is made from a Victorian chemise which my daughter found in a charity shop, and I rust printed and eco-dyed it, and I also added some stitching, and when I did the eco printing I also laid rusty nails on it so you can see some nail prints on it as well. I also added crochet, sort of like flower pieces, to the work, including on the dress section. The dress section is made from a 1920s cotton slip. It was not in very good condition when I was given it, and I actually did do some natural dyeing, mainly with iron rich dye, and some rust printing as well on that. And the piece at the bottom, which you can't see, is actually silk strips which have also been eco-printed, and as I said, the shredded paper stitched onto it. So this has been quite a special piece, and it was based on a book called Mordaunt, and it was about a woman in the early 1900s, and it was written then as well, who had difficulty deciding what to do with her life. She had dreams, especially to travel, but so many responsibilities came up in relation to family and friends that she felt very torn about what she was to do with her life, and she had this burning desire to do something interesting, exciting and worthwhile. And I think really that's quite a modern theme, because we as women still sometimes struggle to reach what we would like to do in life and find that there are limitations. But overcoming them is what gives us the strength and character that we develop. So I also did a suitcase to go with this, a vintage suitcase. I put the cover of the book on the suitcase, and I shredded the rest of the book and put that in the suitcase also, and that was to represent turning her back on her old life and expectations and forging ahead into the future, although she did kind of find a happy medium. So that was the piece that I wanted to share with you. Hidden underneath the jacket are also the shoulder straps of this slip dress. I made them out of vintage collars that were given to me. So as I said, I'll show you some details in the photos at the end of this video. This piece has been in 3 different events. It was in the exhibition in Victoria, as I mentioned, run by Bellini Books. They also have an art award called the Biblio Art Award, and that's what I entered it in, and it was exhibited at that exhibition. It also went to a wearable art event in Queensland, which is in northeastern Australia, and it was in a wearable art event in Launceston in Tasmania also. And it is available online. It can be worn, but it is a bit fragile, but it would also look amazing just hanging up on a wall. So as I said, it is for sale, and I'll share the link under this video in the description. You might be wondering why I have a vintage floral album on my table. The reason is that this is a very special week for us. It's actually going to be our 50th wedding anniversary on the 31st of August. And if you've been watching my videos, you'll remember that in an early video when I shared one of my slow stitching journal pages, I mentioned that our 50th wedding anniversary was coming up, and I inserted a little photograph of my husband and I that was taken recently. So I just thought I would share with you some of the photos that were taken on August the 31st, 1974. We were already collecting vintage things. We just loved the history and the story and the workmanship of old furniture and other items. So this was a lovely leather photo album that we found. It's quite worn and it's coming to pieces, which it was when we first bought it. It's got a lovely catch on it, and beautiful tooling on the cover. And we used it for some photos that my uncle took with his Polaroid. And I don't think I had seen a Polaroid before then, so it was quite something. And the colours are not as bright as they were, and you can see that I cut them in oval shapes to fit them in, and this is a bit torn, which it was already. So I might just try to tidy that up a little bit, but we don't want to use the wrong glue, so we might get some advice about fixing this. But we really appreciated him taking the photos. This one is a bit special. I don't know if I can hold it up. I've been having a bit of trouble with reflections. But that one's of me with my dad going down the aisle in the Methodist Church in Lilydale in Tasmania. And my dad passed away in 2011. So it's just a lovely memory. I love the decorations on the pages as well. I think they just look lovely. I would say this is well over 100 years old, this album. It was raining on the day, so we had to use umbrellas. The bridesmaids were my sister Mary and my friend Gillian. And Ian had two friends for his attendance, I guess you could say. This photo is of my aunt giving Ian a congratulatory kiss. It was her husband that took the photos. And that's Ian and I ready to go away on our honeymoon. I actually lost that red suitcase later. Our boot popped open when we were on a journey within Tasmania, and we didn't know it had fallen out until much later in the trip. We never ever found it. And it had some doll's clothes at that time for a doll that I brought to Tasmania from Canada, and which I'd just given to our daughter to start playing with. So this must have been about 6 years later maybe that I lost the suitcase, and it was a present from my parents. So that's something that I wish I still had. But I did crochet the top that Ian is wearing, and I knitted the one I'm wearing as well. My mum helped me a little bit with the finishing of them because I was running out of time. You know what it's like working to deadlines. But I just love the decorative element of this album. And as you can see, the binding is still good inside, but there are some tears because the paper is getting quite fragile. So this album holds our black and white photos. And I love the Art Nouveau design. And it has gold flowers on the front and a lovely asymmetrical border, which was quite typical of Art Nouveau. And a lovely catch. Part of it is missing, but some of it's still there. And this was like that when we bought it. It looks like it has gold bound corners as well, or brass, but it's actually just painted on. Possibly this is still leather. It feels like leather, so it could be leather that's been dyed. When I open it, you can see it's got a lovely flyleaf in it. And it's just a beautiful design. You can see why we bought it. We just loved it. And when you turn the pages, you'll see it has spaces for photographs. And I've put photographs in. There are some missing because we've used them in frames. So I might see if I can find the negatives and get some more printed. I'll just turn this around and you can see this is the whole wedding party. And of course my husband and I. Ian had just had a very serious car accident a few months before and nearly died, and he had broken his arms really badly as well as having internal injuries. So we made capes for the men because he found jackets really hard to get his arms into. He was only just able to start writing again because his left arm had been paralysed, but luckily, and I think due to providence, it healed, and he hardly has any after effects, but he has lots of scars. It was a really amazing day that we could actually get married. He could sign his name. He was well. He had some after effects, which he still has some difficulties with, but very, very minor compared to what could have been. And as I said, my sister and a friend attended me, and two friends of Ian's attended him. Ian's mother made the groomsmen's capes. I made Ian's. I made my dress, and Mary, my sister, made her own dress, and Ian's mother made Julian's dress. Our groomsman, Peter, had broken his leg in a motorbike accident just before the wedding, so he was on crutches, but they're hidden behind the bridesmaids. And the other unusual thing about our wedding was that Ian is a bit of a car man. He loves restoring old cars, and this is actually an Oldsmobile hearse, which he didn't even have to restore because it was in really good condition, and he bought it from a relative who was a funeral director. We had a different car lined up for our wedding, but that was destroyed when Ian had his accident, and that was a 1949 Ford Anglia soft-top Tourer. We do have another one, so it's lovely to have that one, which I might share a photo of sometime. So that's the story of our wedding. It was a very special day in more ways than one, as you can tell. There's a couple more photos. Cutting the cake, signing the register. I made my basket of flowers. Well, I arranged my basket of flowers as well, which you might have noticed in other photographs, and I stitched flowers onto a piece of ribbon for my hair as well. That was the cake. Double decker. So yes, we're going to go away towards the end of the week and just enjoy some time together, maybe catch up with some friends we haven't seen for ages, and I'll take some photos and maybe some video, and I'll share them with you next time. You might remember this cloth journal that I made using one of K3n Chambers' tutorials, and her channel is K3n Clothtales, although I have mentioned this quite often because I do follow her quite seriously. I do like what she does. And this is fairly simple. It's collaged with fabrics and then mainly straight stitch, but also there is some cross stitch as well, and some fly stitch and a few other things. And I made this to hold a little journal that I write in from time to time, and I use the quotes from that in my slow stitching journal, which is the year-long project. So I thought, when I saw Jeri Bellini's phone case, I thought, well, my phone case is falling to pieces, so maybe I should make a new one. And when I made it, I started by just making it flat. And if you've been following me on Facebook, you will have seen that. I've shared a photo of it. So this is how it looks now. And you can see that I've used cloth twine again, and I've used similar fabrics as the pouch, but I've embroidered it in a different way. So I've done some pistol stitch there, some coral stitch, some running stitch with some pleated silk ribbon, some French knots, fly stitch, and then on the other side I've also used some feather stitch, which I really enjoy doing. I did do some partial circles as well, and that is a whip stitch, which is a running stitch with a thread woven through it. The couching that I did was a piece of wool yarn, and I also outlined it with a running stitch to quilt the layers. The embroidery also goes through all the layers apart from the lining, so it goes through the collage section and through the thin wadding that I've used inside it. Now this button, not sure if it is a button actually, I think it's from some broken jewellery that I had, and I've used a couple of pieces of this on two of my scrolls as well, which you may have seen in previous videos. And there are two different lengths. This is the shorter length. It has two holes, which makes it easy to stitch, and I think it's made of bone. So again, I've made some cloth twine, and this is how it works. I wanted to make a flap, and I also wanted to make it big enough so that when my phone goes in, I've got room for credit cards, maybe a bit of change. So when I undo it, it opens like that, and then it has an open top. And I've lined it with a little bit of cotton that I had that had spots on it, but the colours were just right, and I thought it made a nice contrast to the outside. So basically it was just a square, a slightly off square piece. and then I folded it in half, stitched it together with seams at the bottom and on the top, at bottom and side I should say, and then made the lining in the same way and put it inside, folded the edges in and did a tiny stitch to close it all, kind of a slip stitch process. So when my phone goes in, this folds down, and then I just wrap the string around and I'll just tie it around this a few times so you get the idea, and that means it's secure. And also this means that if I drop it, it at least has got a little bit of padding on it to protect it. Here I have some wood blocks which are used for printing, and I'm not really sure where I got them. I think I got them from a couple of different sources. So this one here is a phoenix, which is a beautiful block. This one is fern type plants, and this one is part of a wheel by the look of it. And you can see that they've been hand carved and they're made of wood. And I have used them for printing in the past, especially before I started doing natural dyeing. And I used them with paint and ink. But with the paints that I make from the dirt, it's not really fine enough to use these for printing. But I saw an idea the other day, and I'm sorry but I can't remember who it was, where the block prints or stamps even were used to print onto fabric or paper, and then that was the pattern to use for printing, for stitching. So I thought that was a really interesting idea, and I do have some stamp pads which are pigment paints, or pigment ink I should say, and I think they might work really well for stitching patterns on different things. These are vintage blocks, so I can't even reference the designer, but they are beautifully done. So I just think it's nice to be able to use them if I can, rather than have them stored away. And they have been stored away for several years. So watch this space. I just wanted to show you in more detail what I'm doing with my current art quilting project. As you saw in the last video, I'm doing it in a number of layers, so it's important that I don't have the layers too thick, or I'm going to find it difficult to get my needle through when I get to the top layer. I'm starting from the bottom up, so I've got wool on the very back, and that's a vintage wool which has been naturally dyed, and there are holes on it as well, which I will patch, and that will be part of its story. And then the next layer is this cotton, which was eco-printed by a friend, as I mentioned last time. And I love the eco-printing on it. She's obviously used iron because the leaves are quite dark, and then there's a lovely background as well with some resist prints of something a bit more fine. I'm not sure what it is. And then I'm being gradually quilting on the diagonal across the whole thing. And I think it's about 1 metre long by about 50 or 60 centimetres wide. So it's not tiny. It's not like a bed quilt, but it is a reasonable sized wall art that's going to be finished at some point. And I did share with you that I use masking tape when I do these quilting lines if I want them to be straight. And the good thing about the masking tape is you can reuse it. So this is the second time I've used it, and it's still got quite a bit of stick. And if I move it and stick it down in the next place, which will be the third time, it will still have a bit of stick there. And I can use it usually about 6 or 7 times before I have to get a new piece. I did have to be careful when I was doing the chiffon because that frays easily, so I had to be careful peeling the masking tape off, and I just did it very carefully with my fingernail to get it off without damaging it. But otherwise, because the cotton is quite robust, there's no problem. And I also shared with you that I'm not quilting with a normal quilting thread. I'm actually using a cotton embroidery thread, and that's quite strong, but it's also soft, and it's really lovely to work with. This is going to take me a while because I have a layer of mulberry bark to go on top of this, as you would have seen. Then some pieces of cotton, then the couched strip that I did, plus some silk cocoon and some other embellishments. And I need to be able to get through all the layers. So there's no wadding in this because I feel like there are enough layers already. So I'll continue sharing progress on this. As I said, it's a long-term project, but I'm really enjoying the process.